Pack it up, old man. Bradley Wellington's voice cut through the conference room like a dull knife. He didn't say it with anger, which somehow made it worse. He said it with that casual dismissal you'd use to tell someone their parking meter expired. The kid was 28, wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck, and sporting that smug smile that screamed, "Trust Fund, baby." His title? VP of Strategic Innovation. Yeah, that's apparently a real job these days. I'm Patrick Sullivan, by the way. 54 years old. Been running operations at this company for 27 years, ever since I got out of the Navy. Built this place from the ground up, literally helped pour the concrete foundation back in '97. But according to Brad here, I was legacy deadweight, unable to adapt to digital transformation. I sat there at that mahogany conference table, the same table I'd ordered back in 2001, and just looked at him. Didn't blink, didn't argue. After 8 years in the Navy Construction Battalion and nearly 3 decades in corporate America, you learn that panic is just poor planning. Before I tell you how I systematically destroyed this punk's entire world, let me paint you the full picture of that beautiful Tuesday morning when my life supposedly ended. Brad was tapping his tablet against the table, leaning back in his ergonomic chair like he owned the place. "Look, Pat," he sighed, "it's nothing personal. We're pivoting toward agile methodologies. We need digital natives to interface with next-gen logistics platforms. Your operational style is, well, it's vintage. And vintage works for bourbon, not business." He actually chuckled at his own joke. The 2 interns sitting across from me stared at their shoes. Jennifer Martinez from HR, woman I'd helped through her divorce 3 years back, couldn't meet my eyes. She was furiously scribbling notes on a blank page, probably trying to document this train wreck for legal protection. The silence stretched thin until Brad felt compelled to fill it. "We've prepared a severance package," he continued, clapping his hands together like he was announcing a surprise party. "Standard stuff. 2 weeks' pay for every year served, capped at 6 months. Need your badge, laptop, and keys by 5 p.m. Oh, and Pat, make sure you wipe those personal files off the drive. Don't need your phishing photos clogging up our cloud storage." The room went dead silent except for the hum of the AC. I stood up slowly, my knees popping, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the quiet room. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the office park. The sun was hitting the asphalt hard, and I could see the employee parking lot, the manicured lawn, and the cornerstone of the building itself. That cornerstone. If Brad only knew what that piece of granite represented. "Understood," I said, my voice level as a construction laser. No emotion, no tremolo. Brad looked disappointed. He wanted the broken old man begging for his pension. He wanted tears, pleading, maybe some desperate offer to learn TikTok. He wanted to feel powerful by denying mercy. My calm was robbing him of his moment. "Great," he said, checking his Apple Watch with theatrical efficiency. "Got a lunch with the digital transformation consultants. Jen will walk you out." I walked back to my desk, each step measured and deliberate. 27 years of my life in that spot. I had a coffee mug older than Brad. I had a desktop computer that actually worked, unlike those tablets they kept pushing on everyone. I had a framed photo of my late brother Will, who got me this job back when the company was just 2 brothers with a truck and a dream. The office buzzed around me like a disturbed anthill. People were whispering, stealing glances, their voices carrying just enough for me to catch the fragments. "Did you hear? Pat finally got the axe. About time. Guy still prints emails. Heard he keeps paper files in actual folders. My dad's age. Probably doesn't even know what Instagram is." I let them whisper. I let the humiliation wash over me like cold rain. It was necessary fuel. You see, when you've been somewhere for nearly 3 decades, you become part of the infrastructure. People say things in front of infrastructure they'd never say in front of a person. They do things in front of infrastructure they shouldn't do. And infrastructure remembers everything. I started packing methodically. Not everything, just the essentials. The photo of Will, a specific flash drive I kept locked in my desk drawer, my old Navy coffee mug that said "CBs, we build, we fight." HR had thoughtfully provided a cardboard box that looked like it would disintegrate if you breathed on it too hard. Jen Martinez hovered by my desk, clutching her folder like a life preserver. "Pat, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know this wasn't my call." Brad has the board's ear. They want a younger image for the quarterly reports. It's fine, Jen, I said, dropping my stapler into the box. The weight of it made the cardboard bottom sag ominously. Really, sometimes change is exactly what a place needs. You're taking this so well, she said, sounding both relieved and confused. Most people scream, or cry, or threaten to sue. I'm not most people, Jen. Never have been. She nodded, made a note on her clipboard, and drifted away toward the next crisis on her list. I picked up my pathetic little box and walked toward the elevators, passing landmarks of my professional life. The break room where the coffee machine was perpetually broken, machine I usually fixed myself because maintenance was always too busy. The server room where the cooling units hummed their mechanical lullaby, units I'd negotiated the service contracts for back when we actually cared about reliability over cost. I passed Brad's glass-walled office where he was already on the phone, laughing, feet up on his desk like he was auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. He spotted me walking by with my cardboard box of shame and gave me a little mock salute through the glass. "Enjoy retirement, Sully," he called out loud enough for half the floor to hear. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking toward those elevator doors like I had somewhere important to be. Because, as it turned out, I did. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. The lobby was cool and sterile, all marble and chrome designed to impress visitors who'd never see the actual work getting done upstairs. Andy Foster, our security guard, looked up from his desk with confusion written all over his weathered face. "Leaving early today, Mr. Pat?" "Something like that, Andy. You take care of yourself, you hear?" I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the humid afternoon. Walked across the parking lot to my 2019 F-150, placed the box in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Just sat there, staring at the building I'd helped create. It was a beautiful building, I'll give it that. 4 stories of gleaming glass and steel sitting on prime real estate with direct highway access. I remembered when it was nothing but a dirt lot with survey stakes. I remembered the smell of wet concrete and the arguments over zoning permits. I remembered writing the check that made it all possible. Brad thought he'd just fired an operations manager. He thought he'd trimmed some dead weight from the payroll, made himself look decisive to the board. What he didn't know was that he'd just declared war on his landlord. I reached into the truck's center console and pulled out my phone. Dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but one that was still programmed in my favorites list. "Hayes and Associates," a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Tim," I said. "It's Pat Sullivan." "Pat Sullivan? Jesus, I haven't heard from you since the lease renewal back in '05. Everything all right? How's the job treating you?" I looked up at the 4th floor where Brad was probably already measuring my office for a meditation corner or whatever passes for innovation these days. "Just got involuntarily retired about 20 minutes ago, Tim. They gave me the old digital transformation speech." "Ah, hell. I'm sorry to hear that, Pat. Age discrimination lawsuit? I can have papers filed by morning if you want to fight this thing." "No," I said, and for the first time that day, I felt something like a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "No lawsuits. That's too slow, too messy. I want to talk about something else entirely. I want to talk about the land, Tim. Specifically, about the lease agreement for this headquarters building." There was a pause on the line. "The lease? Pat, what about it? They pay rent. Everything's current as far as I know." "I want you to pull the file for Sullivan Holdings LLC, I said slowly, watching a maintenance crew trim the landscaping that I'd personally selected and planted 15 years ago. "I want you to review Clause 11B regarding structural modifications and code compliance. And then, Tim, I want you to start preparing for Phase 1. The silence that followed was the sound of a sharp legal mind connecting dots. When Tim spoke again, his voice had shifted from sympathetic to sharp and focused. "Pat," he said carefully, "are you absolutely sure about this? If we trigger that clause, if we start down this road, it's going to be messy. These people will fight." I watched a pigeon land on my hood and cock its head at me, like it was waiting for an explanation of what came next. "Brad wanted innovation," I said quietly. "He wanted to disrupt things, shake up the status quo. I figure the least I can do is help him accomplish his goals. Copy that. I'll start pulling files." I hung up and started the truck. The AC kicked in, blasting cool air that felt like relief and possibility. As I drove past the entrance sign, one of those sleek modern monuments that had cost the company $30,000 to rebrand last year. I let my mind drift back to where this all began. It was 1999, and the world was about to change in ways none of us could predict. The dot-com bubble was getting ready to burst with the violence of a depth charge, taking down companies that had seemed invincible just months before. Our company, Pinnacle Logistics, was hemorrhaging cash like a punctured fuel tank. The two brothers who'd founded it were selling everything they could get their hands on: trucks, patents, office equipment, anything to keep the lights on for another month. They were about to sell the land under the headquarters building to some developer who planned to bulldoze everything for a strip mall. Prime real estate reduced to a Subway and a nail salon. I was just the operations manager back then, a Navy veteran trying to build something stable in civilian life. But I was also a guy who'd just inherited some money from my grandmother, a Depression-era woman who didn't trust banks and kept gold coins hidden in mason jars buried around her property. I saw what those brothers couldn't see through their panic. That land sat on a major fiber optic junction with dedicated interstate access and room for expansion. It was a gold mine disguised as a dirt lot, and they were about to trade it for enough cash to limp along for maybe 6 more months. So I made them an offer they couldn't refuse, not as Pat Sullivan the employee, but through Tim Hayes and a shell company I created called Sullivan Holdings LLC. Named it after my family because if you're going to own something, you might as well be honest about whose name is on the deed. I offered to buy the land for cash, slightly above market value, then lease it back to them on a 75-year triple net lease. The brothers were so desperate they didn't even ask who was behind the LLC. They just saw the cashier's check, signed the papers, and saved their company. For 25 years, Pinnacle Logistics had been paying rent to Sullivan Holdings. The checks went to a P.O. box, then to Tim, then to a trust fund that I never touched except to reinvest in more real estate around the city. To everyone at the office, I was just Pat from operations who brought homemade chili to company potlucks and knew how to fix the perpetually broken copy machine. To the county recorder's office, Sullivan Holdings was a faceless entity that paid property taxes early and never caused problems. The original founders retired 8 years ago and sold their shares to a private equity firm that installed a board of directors who cared more about quarterly projections than the people who actually made those numbers possible. That board hired executives like Brad, young and hungry types who spoke fluent buzzword and looked good in investor presentations. Nobody from the new regime had bothered to read the original lease agreement. Why would they? It was a legacy contract on autopay, a line item in a spreadsheet that nobody questioned. That was their first mistake. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my modest ranch house with its attached garage where I restored classic cars. I didn't live like a secret real estate mogul because I wasn't interested in impressing anyone. I lived like a man who valued privacy, preparation, and the satisfaction of work done right. I carried my cardboard box of corporate shame inside and set it on the kitchen table, then walked into my home office. The room looked more like a military command center than a study. 2 monitors, a locked filing cabinet, and enough organizational systems to make a drill sergeant proud. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and pulled out a thick leather folder, the original lease agreement. The paper was heavy bond stock, the kind they don't make anymore, and it smelled like victory and careful planning. I flipped through the pages, scanning legal language I'd helped draft a quarter-century ago. Clause 4 covered rent escalation. Clause 8 detailed maintenance responsibilities. Triple net meant they paid for everything. And then there was Clause 11B, my insurance policy, my weapon of choice. Tenant shall not make any structural alterations, additions, or improvements to the premises, including but not limited to removal of load-bearing walls, modification of electrical systems, or changes to HVAC infrastructure without the express written consent of the landlord. Failure to obtain such consent constitutes material breach of this lease agreement. Upon such breach, landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease with 30 days written notice. Perfect. Now I just needed Brad to be Brad. I fired up my computer and logged into the building's security system using credentials I'd established years ago. It had never bothered to change the admin passwords because they were understaffed and overworked, too busy chasing the latest cybersecurity threat to worry about legacy access. I pulled up the camera feeds for the fourth floor, and there he was, Brad Wellington in all his innovative glory, standing with a contractor in what used to be the engineering department. He was pointing at walls, gesturing wildly, doing that explosion motion with his hands that he probably thought looked visionary. I zoomed in on the conversation. The contractor was shaking his head, pointing at structural elements that Brad was clearly dismissing as outdated thinking. I took screenshots, saved video clips, documented everything with the methodical precision the Navy had beaten into me. Then I switched to another screen and pulled up the county permit database, searched for our address, cross-referenced active construction permits. Nothing. Not a single filing for interior modifications, structural changes, or even basic electrical work. Brad wasn't just being reckless. He was planning to go completely off the books. He wanted his innovation hub ready for the next quarterly investor meeting, and permits took time that he apparently didn't have. I leaned back in my chair, coffee growing cold in my hands. The anger I'd felt in that conference room was gone now, replaced by something much more dangerous. Cold, calculating focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about education. My phone buzzed. Text message from Jen Martinez. He's already moving into your office, measuring walls for a collaboration zone. I'm so sorry, Pat. I didn't reply. What was there to say? That Tuesday evening, I sat in my garage working on a '69 Camaro I'd been restoring for the past 3 years, letting my hands do familiar work while my mind processed the day's events. The car had been a wreck when I bought it, but with patience and the right tools, you could bring anything back to better than original condition. That's when I heard about Brad's masterpiece. According to the company-wide email that hit my personal account, they'd been sloppy about removing me from distribution lists. Brad had called an all-hands meeting for Thursday morning to announce Demolition Day, a team-building exercise where employees would literally tear down walls with sledgehammers. I pulled up the live stream link on my tablet, morbid curiosity getting the better of me. Brad was on a makeshift stage in the main atrium, wearing a wireless headset microphone like he was delivering a TED Talk about disrupting the disruption industry. "We're not just a logistics company," he shouted to a crowd of tired-looking employees. "We're a movement. We're the future. The old guard built this place on spreadsheets and paper trails. They built silos. They built walls, literally. And what do we do with walls?" The crowd mumbled something that might have been "tear them down" if you were feeling generous. "We tear them down!" Brad screamed, apparently not trusting his audience to deliver the line with sufficient enthusiasm. The presentation screen behind him changed to show architectural renderings of the new office layout. I stopped tinkering with carburetors and leaned in close to study the plans. My blood went cold. He wasn't just talking about removing some drywall to create open workspace. The renderings showed the removal of 2 primary support columns in the east wing, the wing that housed the server farm and bore the structural load for the floors above. If he cut those columns, the entire east side of the building would be compromised. The servers would shift. The upper floors would sag. We weren't talking about cosmetic damage anymore. We were talking about structural integrity failure that could render the entire building uninhabitable. Brad was going to destroy a $40 million asset because he wanted a collaborative flow state. I watched him point enthusiastically at load-bearing columns like they were minor inconveniences rather than the things keeping the roof over his head. I picked up my phone and called Tim. "Phase 1 is a go," I said, watching Brad literally kick a support beam to demonstrate how non-essential it was. "But Tim, we can't wait for him to spend money on this. He's going to compromise structural integrity Thursday morning. Get the eviction papers drafted, but don't file them yet. First, I'm making a call to the city. Pat, if you call code enforcement, they'll shut down the entire building. The business will halt completely." I looked at my Camaro, a machine that had taken years of patient work to restore properly. They should have thought of that before they fired the guy who actually knew how the building worked. Thursday morning arrived with storm clouds that matched my mood perfectly. I didn't go to the office, obviously, but I did go to the county clerk's office, that fluorescent-lit purgatory where bureaucracy goes to thrive. Rebecca Johnson, who'd been working the counter since the Carter administration, looked up over her reading glasses. "Pat Sullivan. Thought you went corporate on us." "Freelancing these days, Becky," I said, sliding a box of maple donuts across the counter. "Your favorites. In local government, bribery isn't cash, it's pastries and politeness." "What do you need, hun?" "I need to pull the building jacket for 400 Innovation Drive, and I need to see if any emergency construction permits were filed in the last 48 hours. She tapped away on her keyboard with the rhythm of someone who'd been doing this job longer than Brad had been alive. Nope. Last permit on file is for signage 3 months ago. Why, you hearing hammering over there? Loud rumors, Becky. Very loud. I got my certified copies and sat in my truck reviewing the paperwork one more time. Everything was in order. Sullivan Holdings LLC was the undisputed owner with easement rights that prohibited interference with underground utilities or structural modifications without written consent. At 9:45 a.m., I opened my email and drafted a message to the city's building inspection department. Subject: urgent, unpermitted structural demolition, imminent safety hazard, 400 Innovation Drive. I attached screenshots of Brad's architectural plans, the certified ownership documents, and blueprints showing the gas lines that ran directly behind the walls he planned to sledgehammer. For good measure, I included photos from the security feed showing Brad and his contractor examining load-bearing elements. Then I hit send and texted Tim. The Eagle has landed. Serve the papers. I drove to a coffee shop across the street from the office building and settled in by the window with a perfect view of the front entrance. The barista was young enough to be my daughter and looked at me like I was some kind of corporate refugee, which I suppose I was. At 10:15 a.m., the cavalry arrived. Not police, something better. A white city vehicle with official plates pulled up and a building inspector stepped out wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard like it was a warrant for arrest. Behind him, the fire marshal's red SUV. I watched them disappear into the building and pulled up the security feed on my phone. Brad was mid-swing with a sledgehammer when the double doors flew open. The fire marshal walked directly to the DJ booth, because of course there was a DJ at 10 a.m., and pulled the power cord. The silence was beautiful, absolute, and complete. Brad stood frozen, sledgehammer raised above his head, looking like a statue commemorating corporate stupidity. The fire marshal walked up to him and pointed at the hammer. Brad lowered it reluctantly. Then the building inspector stepped forward with blueprints, pointing at the wall Brad had been about to demolish. Then at the ceiling, then at the emergency exits. I couldn't hear the conversation, but body language is universal. The inspector was explaining exactly how Brad was about to commit gross negligence, possibly manslaughter if the building came down on someone. Brad started arguing, doing his explosion gesture. Never argue with someone who can condemn your building with a red sticker. The inspector pulled out his pad and started writing. I smiled and took a sip of coffee. Phase 1 was complete. Within an hour, the building was tagged with a stop work order. Employees were sent home. Brad was on his phone in the lobby, gesticulating wildly at people who were clearly not impressed with his explanations. The board called an emergency meeting. The stock dropped 12% by noon as news of the construction scandal hit business media. Some intern's TikTok video of the fire marshal shutting down demolition day went viral with the caption POV, "Your boss tries to knock down a load-bearing wall and the feds show up." I forwarded that video to the board of directors from an anonymous account, along with a simple message: recommend immediate review of strategic leadership decisions. The next 48 hours were corporate chaos at its finest. Tim filed the eviction notice citing material breach of lease terms. Richard Hammond, the CEO, tried everything: emergency injunctions, settlement offers, even a personal plea that I meet with him. The court hearing was the following. Thursday, Judge Patricia Walters reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every variety of corporate stupidity. "Mr. Henderson," she said to Richard's lawyer, "your client attempted to remove load-bearing walls without permits, endangering the structural integrity of a $40 million building. And Clause 11B of the lease is quite specific about unauthorized modifications. Did your client read this lease?" "The previous ownership negotiated that lease, Your Honor, and your client assumed all obligations. Ignorance of contractual terms is not a legal defense." She looked at me. "Mr. Sullivan, you're seeking possession of the premises?" "I am, Your Honor. The tenant has demonstrated they cannot be trusted with the safety and maintenance of the property. Eviction granted. Tenant has 14 days to vacate." Richard looked like someone had told him Santa Claus was a fraud. Watching a corporate headquarters evacuate in 2 weeks is like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Moving trucks lined the block for days. IT guys cried as they ripped servers from racks without proper shutdown procedures. The creative workspace furniture, those beanbags and foosball tables that were supposed to revolutionize productivity, ended up in dumpsters. On day 10 of the evacuation, Andy Foster called me. His voice was shaky, desperate. "Mr. Pat, I know they screwed you over and everybody knows you had every right to do what you did. But if we lose the data servers, a lot of good people are going to lose their jobs. People with families, mortgages, kids in college." I felt that familiar needle of conscience. Andy was one of the good ones. Worked hard, treated people right, never got caught up in the corporate politics. "Andy, you trust me?" "Yes, sir, absolutely. Back up everything critical to the cloud tonight. Use the encrypted drive in my old office safe. The combination is 1998, the year I bought this place. Save what matters, let the rest burn." "Thank you, Mr. Pat. I mean it. You didn't have to do that. Good people deserve a fighting chance, Andy. That's something Brad never understood." The final day of eviction arrived gray and cold. I stood in the empty lobby as the last of the moving trucks pulled away. Richard Hammond walked out carrying a cardboard box, much like the one I'd carried 2 weeks earlier, except his was full of legal documents and failure. He stopped when he saw me by the entrance, keys to my building in my hand. "I hope you're satisfied," he said, his voice hollow. 18 years building this company, and now we're operating out of a strip mall in the suburbs. I'm not satisfied, Richard. I'm educated. There's a difference." He spat on the sidewalk near my feet, classy to the end, and walked to his car without looking back. The sheriff handed me the new keys, official and heavy, in my palm. "Building's all yours, Mr. Sullivan." I walked through those doors for the first time as the acknowledged owner, not the invisible operations manager. The silence was profound. No humming printers, no ringing phones, no DJ playing motivational music at inappropriate hours. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and stood in what used to be my office. Brad had started painting the walls some hideous shade of millennial pink before the whole thing went sideways. There were holes in the drywall where he'd tried to mount a vision board, and the floor was littered with corporate motivation posters that nobody had bothered to clean up. But it was my mess now, my responsibility, my opportunity. Over the following months, I learned what real satisfaction feels like. Not the quick hit of revenge, but the slower burn of building something meaningful. I converted the building into the Sullivan Veterans Training Center, specializing in construction trades and logistics management. Andy Foster was my first hire. Turned out the kid had always wanted to learn carpentry, but never had the chance. We started with basic electrical work and moved up from there. The training center filled up fast, vets coming back from overseas tours, older workers who'd been pushed aside by digital transformation, young people who wanted to learn trades instead of chasing startup dreams. We taught real skills, how to read blueprints, how to run conduit, how to manage supply chains that actually moved physical goods. One morning, about 6 months after taking back the building, I was in my garage working on the Camaro when my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Brad Wellington. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let him twist in whatever corporate purgatory he'd found himself in. But the bigger part of me, the part that had learned patience in the Navy and wisdom in 27 years of civilian work, decided to respond. "Apology accepted, Brad. We all make mistakes. The question is whether we learn from them." He never wrote back, but I didn't expect him to. Some lessons take time to sink in. These days, I start each morning by unlocking the doors to the training center and watching young veterans file in for their classes. They remind me of myself at that age, hungry, disciplined, ready to build something that matters. I see them learning to measure twice and cut once, to check their work, to respect the tools and materials that make civilization possible. Every so often I walk past the conference room where Brad fired me. It's a classroom now, where we teach project management and quality control. There's a plaque on the wall that reads, "Experience is the best teacher, but wisdom is knowing when to listen to it." Sometimes I think about Brad, probably working at some other startup, probably making the same mistakes with a different group of people who've forgotten that businesses are built by human beings, not algorithms. I hope he learned something from our encounter, but I'm not holding my breath. What I learned is this: patience beats arrogance every time. Experience trumps innovation when the foundation is rotten. And sometimes, when young people think they know everything, the old dog has to teach them that there's more than one way to disrupt an industry. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. Building something better on the ruins of what came before. Teaching the next generation that respect is earned, not demanded, and that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. And sometimes, just sometimes, the furniture fights back.